Now they have a chance to look anew.
After evacuating house number 2, the operations section chief and the division supervisor started down the road to the third house. They were unaware that the fire had made its way further south in the bottom of Alibaugh Canyon, but had not crested the ridgeline. As they made their way to the third house, they had to stop 4 different times because fire was jumping back and forth across the road. By this time, the task force leader with the 2 Forest Service engines had arrived at the third house.
It was extremely dark. You couldn't see. What we were actually calling inadequate safety was actually a really big safety zone. I mean, it was a big, probably about a 5-acre field. But as we got in there, we determined we were going to fire out around the structure. And once we had started that, we as the 2 engines that were in there and myself had come up with the plan that we were just going to let fire it out, let the main fire pass, and then we'd move out as needed.
The task force leader had the crew members run a strip burn around the house, up the driveway, across the road, and back to the house. Just after midnight, the operations section chief and division supervisor pulled onto Cascade Springs Road. The conditions were dark and very smoky.
As we rounded the corner coming into the third house, we weren't going to stay on it. We were going to grab everybody and run. From here, my initial impression was there was a lot of heat in and around the structure, even with their fire on the ground. It stayed on the ground, but you could tell that there was a lot of heat built up, and I didn't even know if the house would make it. As I approached, we got closer to the house. I guess my opinion started to change. To me, it looked like they'd done a really good job keeping the fire to the ground. It was now moving away from the structure. And then you get into the whole deal that these 2 engines I had worked closely with over the years, and I had a higher comfort level with.
Things were doing really well, and I remember Grant and I talking, thinking that, with the firing that they had done, the only thing that was going to get the house, we thought, was direct flame impingement rolling over out of the canopy and onto the house. And the canopy was close enough to that house to where that could have occurred pretty easily.
Operations and me talked, and we pretty much instantly knew that we needed to at least try to fire the remaining patch of this timber island out, and then we'd pull off and go to the next house.
We knew that if things changed, we were standing in a big safety zone, stubble grass surrounded by black underneath it, and the opportunity that we were talking about and the burnout that we were talking about was 30 to 40 feet long, up and then right back down a 5 to 10% slope.
Right here is where operations and myself had stopped, and we're talking and looking at what we want to fire out. Basically, we just wanted to take a strip up and then follow this natural little gentle slope back out to this point and wrap it, and we were going to pull the resources and go. A minute to a minute and a half it should have taken.
Once again, let's refer to the human factors, barriers to situation awareness and decision making in the IRPG, and listen to Dr. Putnam discuss the human elements that may have played a part in this situation.
And when they come in and all the people there, this is the first time they're all Forest Service people. And so there's more likely to be bonding, and these are people you work with, off and on anyway. So it's like everybody's, or people you understand. So when you come into that environment, then you see what your own people are trying to accomplish. It's easier to relate to that, so you shift more naturally into the position of saying, well, what is it they're trying to accomplish here? And they're trying to burn out around that house. So they've gone from this conclusion that they saw so clearly with the volunteers. They come in with their own people, buy into what their own people are doing, and now, what can we do to help?
By this time, the task force leader was in the safety zone with the Forest Service engines 663 and 664. Josh Lang, a crew member of 663, had completed the original burnout around the house and was asked to burn out some mowed grass around a travel trailer parked on the northeast side of the driveway.
After we did the burnout around the house, I went and talked to Dahlman, and he asked me to go and strengthen the line on the east side of the house by putting down some more fire. But the grass in that area was mowed grass, so it wasn't carrying fire at all. So I started making my way back towards the engines, and that's when I ran into Grant and Jay.
When the division supervisor and operations section chief arrived at the house, they got out of the vehicle to assess the situation. In doing so, the division supervisor left his radio, personal gear bag, and gloves in the truck.
So when they jump out, their first thing that they're engaged in is doing the assessment, should we do anything like that or not? And in that role, the culture is like when you're getting out of a rig as a supervisor, you're going to make a quick assessment. You don't put on your PPE because it's going to be quick. You're going to jump back in the rig and you don't want to be buckling and unbuckling your gear. So that was, one of the things that they were going to do. Then they decide that the thing to do is to shift gears now, and they need to hurry up and get some more fire on the ground. So they have a crew member nearby, ask the crew member to come up, and the division soup now says that he'll, take that person and show them, where to lay the fire and actually be a lookout for that person, because, the main fire is still on its way and going to be there fairly soon. Time's of the essence, but at that moment in time, the division soup shifted from being a planner, where the original plan, pull everybody out, the next plan is maybe to lay that strip. As soon as he shifts gear, he should have had the realization that I'm no longer a supervisor. I'm now going out and I'm going to go tactical and implement, the action, which is to lay the strip of fire. So he loses that focus. It was okay to jump out without your PPE for the one thing, but not for the second.
But the one thing that I didn't look at or didn't recognize in my mind was, I was focusing on Grant's face and talking about the things that were going on, and I never looked at him physically do you have your fire shelter in your pack, and do you have your gloves and all of your PPE, and it's something that just never registered in my mind.
And the reason you fail to note it is because autopilot shifts you into that new role. And earlier I mentioned when you shift into a new role, a lot of times things get lost because part of your mind's tugging at you to be what you were, and what that's really saying is that part of that limited cognitive capacity is being eaten up by the role shift, and so you have less awareness to look at what the new situation is. And because they're parked in a safety zone, there really isn't any concern from the main fire. And because there isn't concern from the main fire, part of that may have transmitted into when the division soup goes up into the timber, that the fact that that big safety zone is right there, only, 40, 50 feet away, that we're okay here. And he doesn't, then there's no plan for if anything unexpected happens, and maybe a false sense of security due to that huge safety zone.
The division supervisor instructed the crew member from 663 to follow him into the timber to complete the secondary burnout, while the operations section chief went to the safety zone to talk to the task force leader.
From the time that Grant and Josh started the burn operation, I stood there long enough to make sure that the fire that they were putting on the ground was sucking over and into the initial burnout. When I saw that was occurring, I moved over to talk to Jeremy Dahlman, the task force leader, and let him know that we had grabbed his crew member, and that they were doing a real short operation, and we're going to be coming back into the safety zone.
The division supervisor and the crew member started the burnout and took note of a small spot fire in the meadow at the edge of the timber. They were still unaware how far the fire had moved south in the bottom of Alabaw Canyon.
At this point, Josh is having a hard time keeping his torch lit due to winds. Everything's sucking in, pulling into the fire around the house well. That was the first time I turned back. I was ahead of Josh. As we progress, his torch starts staying lit, and I would say somewhere in this vicinity, I turn around again, and I'm noticing more of a flanking out pattern from his firing. It's sucking in still, but it's wanting to flank away from it. As we continue, I'm seeing a massive glow coming out of the canyon. It's very evident at this point in time. And as I'm starting to get over here, I can see fire on the backside of the ridge. The fire around the house is really hot at this point, so I know there's no option to cut to the left.
The wind goes slack at some point in there, and I recognized that, and then opened the door to my vehicle, and all of a sudden a wind gust hit us, and about blew the door out of my hand, and I thought it was going to blow the door off the car. So when I looked up, there was an exponential change in fire behavior that had occurred.
As I entered, there was a really small spot kind of off at the point here in this timber. And between our fire and it, I think it just button hooks around us. And at that point, we're cut off. As I look out into the meadow, I got a continuous line of fire out in the meadow. Most of it, I'd say, is 4 to 6 foot flame lengths. There's a finger that's jetted back that has like 2 foot flame lengths that isn't with the rest of the front. And you can just basically draw a straight line up under the slope, this little slope here. And at this point, we got 4 to 6 foot flame lengths all the way underneath us. And that's when I turned and I grabbed Josh and I said, we got to make a run for it now. Get rid of your torch, we're running for it. I pulled his radio out of his chest harness and I called operations, told him we've been cut off, we got to make a run for it. That was the only transmission I made. And at that point in time, I thought our best chance was going for the finger with 2 foot flame lengths through the grass. I didn't want to stay in this timber patch. I knew that. And I could tell that whatever is coming up out of the canyon wasn't going to be a good place to be either.
When he stopped and he's like, all right, we're going to have to start a different direction, you know. I kind of tell the urgency in his voice, you know, that we need to go and we need to go now, you know. But at that time, you know, it was just like, all right, you know, we'll be out of here, you know, we'll find a way out. And so at that point, you know, not really too nervous about what was going on. You know, I was just following my officer at that time and didn't feel uncomfortable about it at all.
Right here is where I knew I could see this. There was a good straight shot, and we start running, and as we come out, you know, we're at a good jog, and the wind's starting to pick up a bit.
As we progressed towards that direction, the urgency just built faster and faster every couple of seconds. You know, we started moving at a quicker pace.
We're still headed for this finger that's right out here that has 2 foot flame lengths on it. You know, right out in here, I'd say is 4 to 6 foot still in the grass. Unburned, you know, knee-high grass. Somewhere right in here, I feel a really strong downburst, and I grabbed Josh by the shirt collar and I told him.
He felt the downdraft, and so, like you said, you know, grab hold of me and, all right, let's hold here for a second, you know.
We gotta see what it's gonna do. I didn't even get the words out of my mouth. Instantly, this is now 30 foot flame lengths laid running at us.
At that point, you know, my focus really went into concentrating on what Grant wanted me to do and to follow his